Thaddeus Squire.
So, somewhat contrary to what Aaron, the sort of illustrious introduction that Aaron gave me, I'm here to talk about some things that don't often get talked about at these kinds of events, namely the virtues of being quiet, unoriginal, and sharing. Aren't you glad you stayed and came this morning? But it's something I've been thinking about a lot, and I think there's a power behind the notion of promoting ideas sort of from behind the scenes and doing this balancing act between being in sort of front of the curtain and behind the curtain at the same time. And that there's something also, I would hypothesize, uniquely Philadelphia about this particular skill and culture and character. When Chris asked me to talk, he said, I want you to talk about why Philadelphia, like why are you here? Why did you stay? And so the easy reason is I grew up here. I live now less than a mile from where I grew up. I went away for college for about 10 years and a bunch of shenanigans, and then I came back in 1999, and that was 90 to 99. That was the sort of Rendell magic era, and it was like a whole new city when I came back. But I've been puzzling on this for a long time. You know, the usual answers you get is either I grew up here, the real estate's cheap, cost of living's low, there's lots of interesting people, it's a creative city, eds and meds, all the usual answers. None of those, or very few of those, are actually why I find the city kind of fascinating. The two things that I keep coming back to, and I've had a real challenge trying to figure out how to talk about this or how to describe it, because it's sort of ineffable. But that Philly is a city of quiet innovation, and I want to talk about the sort of a notion of quiet innovation. It's also the birthplace of our American Commons movement, which has really become my career obsession as an idea. And both of these ideas, quiet innovation and commoning, or the Commons movement, are, I think, deeply Philadelphia because they're very Franklin. Both of them originated with Ben. And we know all of the notable and famous things about Franklin, his kite and his statesmanship and all the usual subjects. We don't really, there's some things that are a little bit hidden in his value and legacy that I think are equally powerful to the things that are out front. So first, I want to talk a little bit about quiet innovation. So we spend a lot of time valorizing people who sort of stand out in front with a neon sign and claim to have invented for the first time this idea or that thing. You know, we in America in general find that a very ineluctable notion, but I think we confuse innovation with origination. The drive to be original is not necessarily the drive to innovate. And in fact, some of the greatest innovations out there are not from the people who actually came up with the idea, quote unquote, first, but who followed. You know, there's an old saying, you don't want to be first on the innovation train, you want to be second or third. You know, Edison did not invent the light bulb. He was the first person to figure out how to manufacture it and make it palatable to a marketplace. Same thing with the phonograph. Those were all precedential ideas to his. He's credited with inventing them, but he didn't, in fact. So I'm more interested in innovation than origination. And I think we need to kind of think a little bit deeper in the innovation sphere. My definition is it's the relentless refinement and repositioning of a single pre-existing idea. So it's the ability to kind of take an idea, obsess over it, turn it over, improve it, refine it, but not necessarily originate it. And quiet innovation, if we add that adjective to it, is doing that without owning it, without standing in front of it, without inhibiting it through your own personality, your own presence necessarily, but trying to quietly, relentlessly push it out into the world. And I think that's something that this city historically has done. I think the people who happen to have lived here or have been attracted here kind of do, and it's kind of the character of the city. And going back to our figure Franklin, everybody here is familiar with his famous Silence Do Good letters that he wrote when he was publisher of the New England Current. One of the interesting things about Franklin is that throughout his life, he recognized the value of not putting his name on ideas he wanted to advance. And that was a very conscious, from his very early days as a publisher all the way through his days as a statesman. He realized that if he was the propagator, if he was the face person, people might not believe it, they might be skeptical, they might sense an agenda. And so the best way to get it out there and make it go viral is to pretend it wasn't his. And he did this over and over again in his publishing. It wasn't just with Silence Do Good, but it's interesting that he chose the word Silence as her first name. And this tactic is something that I've spent a lot of time sort of thinking about. And I find myself, even in my own sort of trying to work in advancing ideas, trying to kind of push the credit or the origination story to somebody else, because it then lands with a little bit more lightness and credibility. Even my background in college was Renaissance history, and I was fascinated by the sense that a lot of the Renaissance truth claims, when you wanted to claim something that was true during the Renaissance, you said it came from the East, from this unknown mystic somewhere. You know, had to come from far away, but I didn't think that up. You know, somebody else did. So Franklin was really a great practitioner of this. In my previous life, I started a thing called Hidden City, which is now a very active and marvelous blog about the city, run by Nathaniel Popkin and Pete Woodall. The name Hidden City is actually a sobriquet that Philadelphia used to have. It's a lesser known one. Everybody knows the Workshop of the World, the City of Brotherly Love. But a lot of 19th century literature referred to Philly as the Hidden City. We also are the city of the Hidden River. Schuylkill means hidden river, right? And I became really interested in that idea, and a lot of the inspiration behind Hidden City was looking at the great things that the city has produced, built. In this case, it was a lot of architecture, but that remain hidden in plain sight. The image here is from the 2009 festival, one of the 50 by 50 by 50 foot classrooms at Girard College's Founders Hall. This was the most expensive and massive building when it was built in 1833, built in America, designed by Thomas U. Walter. And Stephen Girard, the philanthropist whose name's all over the city, it was the founder of this school. And he took the idea of an orphanage. I mean, Girard College was really a school for orphans. It still is, although not exclusively orphans. Single-parent children can go there. And he wanted to kind of improve it, put it on a massive scale, and have it be a great benefit and impact to the city. And so he spared no expense and took an old idea, polished it up, blew it up to a scale unprecedented, and built it, and it's still there today. And when people come to Philly, they still go to Independence Hall, but they don't go to Girard College. When people come visit me, I take them to Girard College, because I think it's one of our greatest monuments in the city, but it remains, even today, very unknown. It's one of these quiet moments of innovation that Philadelphia is known for, including architecturally this building by Walter. Thomas U. Walter notably designed the dome of the Capitol building in DC, for which he's much better known, but did a number of things, including this building in Philly. So this notion of a hidden city, of quiet innovation, there's something a little bit Quaker about it too. I don't know what, but I'm not a Quaker. But it feels that way, is kind of the ethos of Philadelphia. We're not that outre, loud, in-your-face culture like a city just to the north of us is known for. But I think that's a virtue. You know, we often sort of apologize for that, but I think that there's something powerful about that, and I think that helps us push ideas faster and further. So the second thing I wanted to talk about is an idea that is not mine, that I did not originate, that has become kind of my single obsession and interest, the notion of the commons. And a commons is any kind of resource that is held in public trust. It is not privately owned, and so it has this kind of similar characteristic to quiet innovation. It's something that is put out into the world, but is not owned by any one person or institution. And it's a very ancient idea. We have commons that go back thousands of years. They're mostly natural resources, meadows in highland meadows, irrigation systems, lakes, rivers. Water is one of the great commons that we manage. I would argue that the commons movement here in this country started with Franklin. 1727, he started something called the Junto as a group of interested citizens from various backgrounds who got together to talk about great ideas. And they had a practice of sharing books with each other. And like most humans, they were pretty bad at giving them back. And so they kept going to the wayside. So Franklin said, I've got an idea. Let's actually start a library. So 1731, he starts the Library Company of Philadelphia, the first public library in this country. Its real utility was to help the junto keep track of its books. He also, by the way, decided to impose a fine on you if you didn't return your book. So we can credit Franklin with the library fee and the invention of that. He did originate that, by the way. That was not just an innovation. I think we can credit him with that. But this institution, which is still active in Philadelphia, again, another one of our hidden sort of treasures and ideas, was really one of the first commons resources. And I think commons hold a lot of potential to save us and improve our society, particularly today when we are so divided and fractured as a people. This is the seal of the library company. The Latin inscription there translates to support the common good is divine, roughly. And I think that's something that's worth thinking about, the fact that that started here. It went to spawn this idea he translated to many other things: fire companies, insurance companies. My house is actually insured by the Philadelphia Contribution Ship, one of the oldest insurance companies in the country. It's still around. You can still buy your homeowner's policy there. Franklin started it, I believe in the 1750s. So we have been a hotbed of commoning since the beginning. And that has been really much of my inspiration behind my second project after Hidden City, which is CultureWorks, what I spend my time with today, which is a management commons for the arts and heritage community. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but basically we put together all of the staff and resources that an artist or an arts organization would need to operate behind the curtain, everything except what they do in the front, and we share it, just like you would share any other kind of common resource. So why should we care about commons today? This is the reason we should care about commons today. This is one of the many electoral maps from our recent midterms. And we all know too well and too painfully how divided we are as a people. And we always have been. That's not new. We feel like it's new, but it's always been there from the beginning. We were a set of colonies that were very loosely confederated and were pulled together by our protagonist, in part, Franklin, and his peers. But this is a characteristic of this country. And I would argue that we're never going to have a map that shows all one color. That's never going to be the case. We're never going to agree on what culture is. We're never going to agree on how to educate our kids. We have too much diversity in this country to ever agree on those commonalities. That's not a weakness or a failure. That's actually, I think, a great character of this country. We have an incomprehensible diversity on all fronts. And the challenge is, how do you manage that? In my view, stepping back from all of this, we have these three sectors. You hear the word sector out there a lot. The public sector is government, everything from the federal down to the local. The private sector, of course, is private enterprise, the free market. We tend to, in our management of our assets and the things that produce public good, think about just those two things as almost dipoles. We tend to be divided between them. In the middle sits the nonprofit sector, the charitable sector, and we don't often think about it as a sector and where it sits, but it's really sort of a hybrid between the public and the private. And one of the things, CultureWorks is a nonprofit. I've spent my entire life in the charitable sector, and the reason I believe in it is I think it's a great way to push governance down to the local level, push management down to the local level, and allow for maximum choice, things that I think are essential to a working polis in this country. We're very skeptical of pushing anything up to the federal level, which is why we have so much division up there. I personally think the federal government, but for public services and defense, is almost a lost cause at this point in our country. But I have great faith in local government, and I have even greater faith in the third sector, in the charitable sector, because it allows us to kind of really organize around things that we have locally in common, not globally in common, because I don't think the global commons in this country is really something that's possible. I want to point out, on the government side, this is the little number at the bottom. Federal government budget, give or take, is about $3.5 to $4 trillion. About half of that's defense. We need it, but it's not something that's doing you good on a daily basis. The other half of the government, which is a lot of public good, it's the environmental work, it's Department of Human Services, all the things that we think of as public good functions of government, that puts it at about 1.75 trillion, roughly. The entire charitable sector is almost as big as the federal government's activity in public good in this country. And that tells me that culturally we like to push that out of the government into the charitable sector. And I think that's something interesting for us to think about. The charitable sector is really a kind of commons. It's public trust assets. All the money that is in CultureWorks bank account is the property of the people of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. A charity is basically a proxy to government. It's not privately owned, it's not privately controlled. Its assets are the assets of the people. And so in that sense, it is a kind of commons. And we have historically and to date governed much of our social good through the charitable sector. And so I think that's something to place a lot of hope in and a lot of attention in as we move forward. So to wrap things up, I want to encourage us, and in thinking about commons, it allows us to think not just about private notions of ownership, but sharing. Commons are all about sharing. And I've just juxtaposed these three kind of ideas, public and private, sharing and shareholding, which is more about kind of private ownership, community versus commerce. I'm not against commerce or private ownership. I think we need the free markets, but I think we need a balance between the two. To go back to our book theme with the library company, a library on your left is a commons, just like Franklin's. The bookstore is really about shareholding. One's about sharing, the other's about ownership. I go and I buy the book, I take it home. We get the right a lot in this country, and we focus a lot on that, but I think we need to think much more about how we can do more of the left. In similar fashion, we have to think more about what is going to generate community. Sharing generates community and generates ties that are positive, that are strong, that are supportive. Commerce is not necessarily a bad thing, but tends to kind of fracture us. You've got a bunch of people in line not caring about each other buying books. That was my Google grab as a contrast. So these two dipoles of American culture are really kind of mediated and mollified by the charitable sector. And I think we need to think more about how we can use commons, how we can promote those ideas of local shared assets, whether that's privately organized or charitably organized. That is something that I think will steer us in a more impactful and positive direction as a country. So, in closing, to wrap up these two ideas of sort of private innovation and commons, I would advocate that if you want a successful, happy, healthy life, find one idea, just one, and make sure it's not original. Make sure you borrowed it from somebody else, but it has the power to captivate you. For me, that is commons. If I look back across everything I've done, that's been the theme. Don't own it, share it, and think about all the ways that you can do that. Thank you.